Hello, my name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM. Another expert interview today with Julio Viskovich. Hey, Julio.
Hey, John. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. And Julio's been a long-time expert in social selling and helping salespeople adapt to the digital age. So I thought today we would talk about particularly that part of it, how you are helping salespeople adapt to the digital age. So maybe start off with just a basic question. When you talk about adapting to the digital age, what do you mean?
Well, when I think about adapting to the digital age, it's about really matching what's happened with the buyers, right? I mean, nobody can look at, the industry in the shape it's in today and say we haven't undergone drastic changes, right? We think of how the buyers changed. Everyone's mobilized, everyone's digital, everyone's engaging over the social networks, whether it's for business reasons or whether it's for personal reasons, they're there, right? So that's the first thing. And it's how do we then bring the right tools, strategies, and approach as salespeople to be able to give that modern buyer what they need out of us. Our role's changing every day. The more information that's out online, the more that takes away from our traditional role as a salesperson, and the more it takes us down a line of, okay, so now our buyer has more information than they had in the past. Now we have to change. We have to be a little bit more of a service-oriented salesperson and make sure that we make the deal as easy as possible, provide them insight when needed, but not oversell like we may be used to in the past.
So, but part of the issue, I think, and I don't know whether you're coming up against this, is that obviously there's so much information out there. There's so many tools. There's so many, ways of leveraging, the digital media. Is there a danger that people get too caught up with it and then lose sight of the kind of the selling or the human aspect of it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I probably could point to myself in my earlier stages of my career going through that, where I remember thinking, you know what, I think the cold call is dead. I think we can throw away the phone. I like this communication strategy better. And you know what, fast forward 5-6 years and you ask me that same question, that's not the case. Right. I think of, and I credit, Thomas Hopkins for this example a while back, when you think of a salesperson, and I always like to make that comparison as a golfer, right? Mm-hmm. You have a bag of clubs and you need all of them. You need your chipper, you need your driver, you need your 7, your 9, etc. Social media really is one of the clubs in your bag that complements all the other things that you're doing in your sales process. And if you put too much power into one club and show up with just your driver, it's not going to work, right? So I really do see it as a complement, and that's the biggest thing. We can't see it as something that we're just going to make our business on every day. Jump on the social, that's going to be it. It's just not the case. It's a club in our backpack, and we have to realize that that's the case and not get too carried away with automation, because that is, I think, and we can get into this conversation deeper, but that's the biggest part of social selling that's kind of been a negative for me, is the loss of authenticity and people thinking, wow, I like this automation thing. Why don't we just crank it up a notch? And I think we've lost some of the human aspect in the sales process as a result.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the idea where you can automate your authenticity. There you go.
Right.
Yeah, you can. And I do think automation. I do think it has made people somewhat lazy. Looking for shortcuts. So here's an interesting question, right? So you're probably dealing with both ends of the spectrum, right? So you're dealing with salespeople who maybe have been around a long time, and adapting to the digital world is a little bit more difficult. And then you're probably also at the other end of the spectrum dealing with people who are newer to sales, maybe digital natives who are over-reliant on digital media. So when you're working, how do you handle these two audiences?
Well, both very different and, tremendously relevant. And that's exactly it. I mean, you have folks that have been doing this for a very long time, cranking the phones, hammering out emails, doing face-to-faces, sending out Christmas cards, doing things the old way, which is great because you need those. Those are such tremendous aspects of the sales process that will never go away. For them, it's a matter of understanding that what you've been doing for years is still relevant, but we do have additional, tools and parts of this process that we can bring in to make those more effective. So if you've noticed that your open rates in your emails are dropping substantially, well, that's, across the board. And what can we do about that? Well, let's plug in the social a little bit. Let's try and pull some personal items in. Let's spend a few minutes on somebody's profile. I'm a big fan of just baby steps. So with some of those traditional folks, it's just sitting down and saying, hey, let's not change anything you're doing, except when you send that email or when you jump on that first discovery call, let's spend 3 minutes, comb through their LinkedIn and see if there's any commonalities so that we can accelerate rapport a little bit. And those small baby steps, I think, have been essential. Actually, when you asked about the digital millennials and the digital natives, that's sometimes even harder for me to deal with, when most people would think that they're the easiest to deal with. And I think the reason is, to kind of go back to our last part of our conversation, they think that that's all they need. This is all I need. I can automate things, I can use digital, and everything can be done online. I can't recall anyone closing a deal on social or sending the contract on social or doing those things. It's just the foundational principles. So I found with the digital natives, it's about taking them back to the traditional pieces of things and teaching them, the Zig Ziglars, the Thomas Hopkins, the foundational parts of sales, so that they can see how they can actually leverage social but become much more traditional in their approach.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. It's fascinating, having to, balance between the two different groups. So how do you think? So when the first wave of social selling, came through, whether it was 5 years ago, whatever, people argue about it. What has changed between the first waves, do you think, and today?
Yeah, good question. The first waves, I think we were all trying to figure everything out, right? We were trying to figure out, what is this social thing? Does it make sense? Should we be on LinkedIn? Should we be on Twitter? How do we measure if it's even successful? All those initial early stage questions. And I think after we started to figure things out, what are the KPIs we could use to actually tie social to the sales process? And we started to figure that out. That second wave of social was all of these different new tools and technologies that came out. It seemed like everywhere you looked, there was a new part of a quadrant being, unveiled somewhere, or this tool that didn't fit into any of the buckets previously. And I think now we're overwhelmed sometimes with automation tools that take away from the human aspect of the sales process. So that's one thing. I think I've mentioned it already, but that's one thing I've noticed go from that initial part where it was very authentic. We were online, we were engaging in hashtag chats, doing all sorts of things, and that human to human element was there. And then I think, how can we scale this and automate it was the second part. And I think that's where we're at today. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think that's how we've evolved.
So when you engage with people and you're advising them, you talk about baby steps. What are some of the first baby steps that you advise people to do when they're trying to maybe evolve into being more digital savvy?
Yeah, I think the first part is just making sure that you have a presence in the right spot. So just sitting down and understanding, okay, well, if your buyers are here, then that probably means that we should be there, on a daily basis. So let's go on LinkedIn or Twitter, or, if you're in real estate, maybe it's Facebook or whatever that is. But let's go there and let's develop a presence, first of all. So what are the good people, the professionals, the influencers in your space that are doing really well? What do they look like? And let's take some of those elements and let's build your profile so that when somebody looks at you, on LinkedIn, it's not just your CV anymore. It's actually something that piques their interest, that adds value to the buyer. So I think the first step is just having a social presence. And then I think probably very close after should be just listening. Get on those platforms and just listen. Start to take in things for a couple weeks. Start to see what are people saying? How do you engage? What are the length of the post? Should you be using images? Start to learn the lay of the land a little bit. And I think by taking that kind of 2-week approach up front where you're just going in very slowly and just listening, of course, you're not going to see results in that first 2 weeks, but it's necessary to sort of take a step sideways sometimes to take a leap forward. And I think that initial 2 weeks up front to just listen and get used to the best practices and see what other salespeople are doing and monkey see, monkey do before developing your initial strategy on how you're really going to roll in social to your sales process, I think that is a great way to start.
So could you give some examples of where, companies you've worked with, you obviously don't have to name them, but where you have seen this successful transformation take place and what it's looked like and what the results have looked like?
Yeah, there's some really good examples, right? If people really buy in and they do things right from a strategic standpoint, it's tremendous, the results you can see. So, one I guess I'll draw on a medium-sized company for this example. So before I had worked with them. They had not had social as a part of their sales process. So they sell professional services, and what they were using is just a primary mix of email and phone, right? So they were relying on their marketing department to drive in all of their leads, landing pages, run email campaigns, etc. So we took this company and essentially, through my process, got them involved, digitally ready to be online. Here's your profile. The best thing that we did that came next was provide them the right content that their buyers wanted. That was the biggest thing. We found out who are their buyers, what publications are they reading, what questions are they asking today. Let's use the Google Keywords tool and figure out what people are talking about in your space. And let's start building content on the marketing side that fits that. And let's have our sales team start sharing it. So I think within 6 months of that program of just giving the sales team the right content and having them share it in the right places on LinkedIn, on Twitter, we essentially we moved social media from non-existent into their biggest source of leads, and ultimately added an additional $1 million of revenue on their top line. That was just in 6 months. So that was incredible, right? And I think the reason that happened was their buyers were hungry to search for information online. And that company specifically was not feeding them that information. They weren't leaving the breadcrumbs online for them to find it. And when they started doing that, the results were tremendous. Spending 30 seconds a day clicking a button to share a piece of content, all of a sudden we've seen people drive to the website, and leads increased substantially. So really good win for that one.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about the future. Where do you see all of this going? What do you think the next evolution is going to be?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm a little bit scared because I see chatbots becoming really popular now. And I'm starting to, 5-6 years ago, we started to say things like, salespeople might face automation in the near future. Are we going to need salespeople? And, I was always skeptical about that, but now I'm starting to see chatbots take the place of, lead generation folks, or, it's a scary situation in that regard because, again, I don't want to go down that automated route. I'm a little bit worried that, B2B sales goes down that route. It's not going to be a good thing. So I do see that taking place more often. But what I hope to see happen is salespeople give a little bit of a pushback to technology and start to go back a little bit to that traditional model. One thing I've started to do, just because I feel that nowadays, when I first started, social media was a way to differentiate yourself from other salespeople. Now I feel that it's almost a differentiator to be the person to send them a Christmas card through the mail.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm seeing things go two different directions. One, a movement towards let's build more automation into things, more products, more tools, more technology. But then I'm seeing salespeople pull back a little bit and say, well, hey, you know what? People actually want more of that human touch now to build that relationship a little bit better. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, John.
Yeah, no, I think so, because I think I wrote a blog post recently because I was looking up information overload, and I found in Wikipedia there was a couple of terms. One was infobesity. Another one was, I can't remember, but they're quite interesting creative terms. But I do agree with you. I think that there's so much information out there. There's so much stuff being pushed out that a smart salesperson can differentiate themselves by being the one who cuts through the noise for the customer and actually does have that, human to human interaction with them. Because I agree with you. I think with AI, with chatbots, with all of that, there's going to be some people who think that they can, completely replace salespeople or replace a chunk of the sales process with all this automation. And I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the day that you start sending out a contract to get signed without even having a chat with somebody, it's going to be interesting, man.
It is. So what are some of the challenges that you face still today, with organizations trying to convince them that they do need to get more digitally savvy?
I think it's the lack of time people have to invest into social media and spend their, parts of their key parts of their day when they should be calling on people or doing sales related activities. I think how much time should I spend or should you spend on social and what's acceptable is a big question. And I think a lot of companies struggle with it because they see the value in social media and they say, let's do it. They do it wrong. They engage everybody on it, or they work with a company who trains them for a day and then runs away and never speaks to them again. And then they're left with a mess. People are on Twitter doing all sorts of things that don't make any sense. They're not, strategized towards their sales process. People are on LinkedIn going about things the wrong way. So it's really, if you have just a finite amount of time, what are the high value sales activities that you can spend your time on? Right. And I think that's the biggest thing I realize is when I look at some of the folks using LinkedIn, they're spending their time chatting with people that are not even working with the companies they're targeting. It's guys, I know you're there, but let's use this more strategically. And I think that's been the biggest part. All of us have learned how to use social media from a personal perspective because that was our first way of using it.
Sure.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. And now it's, hey, how do you actually do this properly and invest your time and translate that into sales and into numbers? And that's the biggest thing. So I find a lot of my time is spent on, well, here are the high value sales activities for you. Here's how you really cut away the noise. And here's the 500 people on the 25 companies that you're working on. And let's really drive this. I think that's the biggest thing is finding out what that right strategy is to make best use of your time.
Yeah, and I like what you just said, and it's about focusing really in on your target buyer or your target influencer and cutting out the rest. Because it's probably very tempting to engage with somebody who wants to engage with in a conversation with you. If that person isn't in your target list, isn't a target. I mean, yeah, it's like standing outside your building, isn't it? Just chatting to a random person passing by.
That's it. So I think sometimes salespeople think social is almost like a water, a trip to the water cooler, the coffee machine for a minute, and it gets messy quickly. But there are some people that are just so hyper targeted. I compare the difference between the two is hunting and fishing, right? So you have your fisher people who are just out there, doing their thing, casting out lines, putting out random content that's generalized. But then you have a certain type of person that's really strategic with their hunting, and they see who they're working on. They're looking at their feeds. They're seeing what questions they're asking or what content that they're putting out. And then they're aligning the right content that they have in their queue and pushing it over to them to forward that conversation. And those are the people that are doing a really good job on social. And it's a pretty small percentage still.
Yeah. So it sounds like the key message here is to really be targeted and understand who you're going after, and then really use it strategically, but use it strategically like you would a club in your golf bag, right? Like don't, when you get close to the green, you probably want to put your driver away. You probably want to pull your chipper out, right?
You got it. Totally. It's a great way to start a conversation, to build a relationship at the beginning, but then things have to get a little bit more furthered in the sales process. And you pull your club out when you need it, and that's about it. I love that, John.
All right. Well, listen, thanks, Julio. This has been a great conversation. Do you want to just tell the viewers a little bit more about yourself, about what you and your company does, and how they can learn more about it and contact you?
Yeah, sure. So Julio Viskovich, as you've mentioned, John, you can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/social selling. What I do essentially is I work with rFactor, which is a company that builds a technology that helps and facilitates salespeople to move into the digital age and to move into social selling and to do it the right way. So essentially, along with training and along with the right technology, you can really make a difference, and you can make sure that you can onboard salespeople into the modern digital age, into social selling, do it the right way, and not set your team back 5 or 6 years by doing it the wrong way.
All right, listen, thanks again, Julio. This is John Golden, SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM, another expert interview, and we look forward to joining you for another one soon. So again, thanks, Julio. Really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.